What if I told you that the most romantic images we cherish of the Victorian era, the shy glances across ballrooms, the blushing maidens behind lace fans, the carefully arranged bouquets, were not born of romance at all, but of a suffocating terror of authentic human connection? We imagine moonlit gardens where gentlemen recited poetry and ladies swooned with genuine emotion. We picture long letters sealed with wax, whispered conversations at the edge of candle-lit drawing rooms. Elegance, poetry, true courtship. But this vision is a lie we tell ourselves to romanticize the past. The truth is far colder, far more desperate, and infinitely more tragic. The Victorian era was not a fairy tale of refined manners. It was a surveillance state of social etiquette, where a single misplaced word could shatter a reputation forever, where the wrong glance could exile a woman from society, and where genuine emotion was hunted down and strangled by the iron. Grip of propriety. In this world of beautiful prisons, Victorian couples didn't choose to speak through flowers because it was charming or poetic. They chose it because they had no other choice. Floriography, the language of flowers, was not a cute parlor game played by bored aristocrats. It was a covert operation, a desperate scream for connection in a society that demanded emotional isolation. Every petal was a syllable, every thorn a warning, and the way a stem was held could transform a declaration of love into a bitter rejection. Today we are going to strip away the petals of this pretty myth and expose the thorny reality beneath. We are going to walk through the cold drawing rooms and stifling conservatories to understand why, for nearly a century, an entire civilization forgot how to speak with their mouths and learned to whisper with their hands through the silent language of flowers. Chapter 1. The Fard of Victorian Luxury, a world of illusions. To understand the desperation that birthed the language of flowers, we must first step into the sensory prison of a high society Victorian drawing room. Picture this: London, 1855, the height of the social season. The air hangs heavy, not just with the heat of coal fires crackling behind brass grates, but with the cloying mixture of beeswax polish, stale perfume, and the suffocating weight of unspoken tension. The room assaults your senses: heavy velvet drapes that strangle sunlight, furniture carved into agonizingly complex shapes that speak of wealth but whisper of imprisonment, and shelves groaning under porcelain knickknacks that serve no purpose except to demonstrate the owner's ability to afford. Useless beauty. In this gilded cage sits our first archetype, the debutante. She is 18, her waist compressed by whalebone stays that restrict her breathing to shallow, polite sips of air. She has been raised like a prize thoroughbred for the marriage market, groomed for this moment when she will be displayed and evaluated like livestock. But observe her behavior closely. She sits perfectly still, her gloved hands folded in her lap like dead birds. She does not speak unless spoken to, and when words do escape her lips, they emerge as carefully modulated notes devoid of passion, expressing only safe, scripted observations about the weather or the music. Across the room stands the suitor, equally trapped though his cage appears larger. He is rigid in his high collar, sweating beneath layers of wool despite the season, terrified of committing a social blunder that would brand him a cad or fool. He gazes at the debutante and feels a surge of attraction, perhaps even love, but he cannot simply walk over and say, "I find you captivating." He cannot ask what she dreams about, what she fears, what makes her laugh, until her sides ache. To do so would constitute a breach of etiquette so severe it could end his courtship before it began, and potentially destroy his social standing forever. Between them, like a sentinel guarding the gates of propriety, sits the chaperone, usually a stern aunt or watchful mother, whose sole purpose is to ensure that nothing improper occurs. And in the Victorian mind, almost everything genuinely human was improper. If a gentleman touched a lady's bare hand, scandal erupted. If a lady laughed too heartily, she was deemed loose. If two young people found themselves alone in a room for 5 minutes, their reputations suffered irreparable damage. This was the fade of Victorian luxury, a life that appeared leisurely but demanded grueling performance art. The wealthy were actors on a stage that never went dark, where every movement faced scrutiny from an invisible audience of gossips and social arbiters. The silence in these rooms was deafening. Born not of peace, but of fear. Fear of judgment, fear of exclusion, fear of the poverty that awaited those cast out from polite society. The Victorians constructed this elaborate system of control because their world was changing with terrifying speed. The Industrial Revolution was reshaping the countryside, new money was challenging old blood, and the cities teemed with chaos and dirt. In response, the upper classes retreated into a fantasy of perfect order, where everything had its designated place and everything remained under strict control, especially their own biology. Passion, anger, jealousy, desire, these were messy, chaotic forces that threatened the stability they desperately craved. So these emotions were repressed, pushed down beneath layers of petticoats and waistcoats, until they nearly suffocated. But human emotion is like water in a dam. You can contain it temporarily, but eventually it will find a way to flow. The pressure inside those drawing rooms was immense. The debutante, staring at the Persian carpet, was screaming inside her corseted chest. The suitor, twisting his signet ring until his finger ached, was desperate to confess feelings that burned in his throat like acid. They were starving for genuine connection, dying for someone to see past the performance to the real person beneath. They needed a communication medium that appeared innocent enough for public display, yet proved complex enough to carry the weight of their hidden souls. They looked around their gilded cages and discovered the one element allowed to be wild, colorful, and sensual, the flowers blooming in their conservatories. Botany was among the few sciences considered appropriate for women. It seemed gentle, nurturing, connected to divine creation. A woman could study flowers, press them, arrange them without threatening the patriarchal order. It provided perfect camouflage. Now imagine this scene. The drawing room falls silent, except for the distant ticking of a grandfather clock. Gas lamps hum softly, casting golden halos against patterned wallpaper. The air carries the scent of coal smoke and beeswax. In the corner, on a small mahogany table, sits a porcelain vase containing what appears to be simple decoration. Inside, a crimson rose in full bloom, a sprig of rosemary, a strand of ivy, a cluster of white heather. To the chaperone, it's merely attractive decor. But to the young woman who passes this table each time she enters the room, these flowers compose a complete sentence. I love you passionately. I will remember you always. I cling to you faithfully. I wish you protection in the danger ahead. Her heart pounds because she knows exactly who arranged this bouquet. She knows what it cost him emotionally to compose this message without ever moving his lips. She knows that in their world of surveillance and restriction, this small arrangement represents an act of breathtaking courage. The flowers that filled Victorian vases were not mere decorations. They were cracks in the wall of silence, the only unchecked beauty permitted in an increasingly gray world. But as our debutante reaches out with trembling fingers to touch the camellia's velvet petals, we must ask, is she admiring natural beauty? Or is she checking for a secret message that could change her life forever? The answer lies not in this polished drawing room where the performance unfolds, but in the dark, narrow corridors below stairs, where the true machinery of this secret language operated through invisible hands and knowing eyes. Chapter 2. The Invisible World. Servants behind the curtain. If the drawing room served as the stage where Victorian society's silent drama played out, the below-stairs world of servants functioned as the essential backstage machinery that made the entire performance possible. We often romanticize the image of a gentleman plucking a rose from his garden and presenting it directly to his beloved, but the rigid reality of Victorian class hierarchy makes this fantasy laughably naive. A gentleman of proper standing did not soil his hands in garden dirt. A respectable lady did not prick her fingers on thorns. The transmission of these crucial floral messages depended entirely on an invisible army of intermediaries, servants, florists, and gardeners who became the silent custodians of their employers' most intimate communications. Consider the extraordinary journey of a single bouquet, from conception to delivery. It begins not with the lover, but with the head gardener, a man whose calloused hands understand soil composition, seasonal timing, and the delicate art of coaxing blooms. He forces tulips to open early in steamy hothouses or nurtures rare orchids transported from distant colonies at enormous expense. Though invisible to his employers, he possesses the raw materials of their emotional lives. When the suitor decides to send his carefully coded message, he doesn't venture into the garden himself. He dispatches his valet with specific instructions. The valet, a man privy to his master's secrets and romantic strategies, carries these orders through the bustling soot-stained streets of London to Covent Garden Market, or an exclusive florist establishment. Here, the atmosphere transforms completely. The air carries the rich perfume of damp earth, crushed stems, and the sharp metallic tang of commercial transaction. The florist, often a woman who has built her livelihood on understanding the intricate codes of floriography, serves as the arms dealer in this war against silence. She possesses encyclopedic knowledge that surpasses even her wealthy clients. She knows that red tulips declare passionate love, while yellow tulips convey the gentler message there is sunshine in your smile, often code for hopeless affection. She understands that including a single sprig of basil, which symbolizes hatred, can transform a bouquet of romantic roses into a devastating insult. She constructs each floral weapon with surgical precision, aware that her choices might determine the course of someone's entire future. The completed bouquet then travels back to the mansion. But its journey is far from over. It cannot be handed directly to the intended recipient. Such directness would violate every rule of propriety. Instead, it passes through a carefully orchestrated chain of servants, each link crucial to the message's safe delivery. The butler, that imposing gatekeeper of domestic order, examines the accompanying card, evaluates the sender's social standing, and determines the arrangement's propriety. Only then does he place it on a silver tray and pass it to a footman, who delivers it to the most critical figure in our shadow network, the lady's maid. This woman occupies a unique position of power and responsibility. She serves as confidante, interpreter, and sometimes spy. She carries the flowers to her mistress's private dressing room, away from the chaperone's watchful gaze. When the debutante sees the arrangement, her pulse quickens, but she cannot simply admire the blooms and intuit their meaning. She requires the key to unlock their secret language. She reaches for her flora, a small, elegantly bound dictionary of flower meanings that has become as essential to Victorian courtship as a prayer book to Sunday service. These guides were bestsellers of their era, outselling nearly everything except the Bible. Titles like The Language of Flowers, Flora's Lexicon, and The Sentiment of Flowers filled bookshop windows and ladies' libraries. But here the invisible world reveals its treacherous nature. Different dictionaries often contradicted each other, assigning conflicting meanings to identical flowers. In one guide, a daffodil might symbolize regard, while another declared it meant uncertainty. Lavender could represent distrust, devotion, or silence depending on which authority you consulted. This inconsistency transformed every floral exchange into a potential minefield of miscommunication. The lady's maid and her mistress would huddle over the petals like cryptographers, cross-referencing multiple sources, debating the precise shade of each bloom. Was that pink deep enough to signify gratitude, or pale enough to mean grace? The servant found herself intimately involved in her employer's romantic destiny, wielding the dangerous power of interpretation. A maid who harbored resentment toward a particular suitor could easily suggest a more negative reading of ambiguous flowers, poisoning a relationship before it could bloom. Moreover, the physical condition of the flowers rested entirely in servants' hands, and this carried enormous significance. If the valet allowed a bouquet to wilt in sunlight during transport, the message transformed completely. Fresh roses declared "I love you," but drooping roses announced "my feelings have faded." A flower presented upside down reversed its traditional meaning entirely. If a suitor sent blooms representing eternal devotion, but the delivery boy carried them inverted, they became "I can never love you." The mechanics of this code proved heartbreakingly fragile, vulnerable to human error, sabotage, or simple carelessness. The servants possessed intimate knowledge of these coded conversations, while remaining powerless to participate in them directly. They witnessed yellow roses of jealousy arriving after scandalous balls. They observed stripped thorns on roses, meaning "I fear nothing," sent by reckless lovers courting disaster. They swept up the dried, crushed petals of rejected proposals and burned the evidence of romantic failures. They became silent witnesses to the emotional carnage of the upper classes, while their own feelings remained invisible and irrelevant. Yet even among servants, flowers held meaning and offered rare opportunities for expression. A kitchen maid might tuck a pressed violet into her Bible, a secret symbol of faithfulness to a memory or hope. A footman might find a single wildflower left on the back step where only he would see it. A tiny declaration from someone equally powerless but equally human. The language of flowers didn't belong exclusively to one class. It seeped into every crack of Victorian society, from the grandest ballrooms to the smallest attic chambers. The irony cuts deep. The wealthy, who prided themselves on independence and superiority, needed the poor to articulate their love. The clean required the dirty to handle the messy reality of human passion. And as our debutante finally decodes her floral message, ivy for fidelity, white violets for innocence, red roses for consuming love, she experiences a rush of connection. But we must question whether this truly constitutes connection or merely represents another layer of isolation. An elaborate game played through intermediaries where the authentic warmth of human touch never occurs. The flowers are undeniably beautiful, but they remain fundamentally cold. And as we shall discover, the rituals surrounding their exchange were designed to become even more suffocating, transforming what should have been expressions of love into instruments of social control and psychological imprisonment. Chapter 3. The Rituals of the Elite. How Etiquette Became a Prison. Having explored the hidden machinery of Floriography, we must now return to the glittering stage where these coded dramas unfolded. The ballrooms, promenades, and dinner parties of Victorian high society. If servants provided the ammunition for this war against silence, the elaborate etiquette of the elite supplied the rules of engagement. Make no mistake, these rules were not designed to facilitate communication, but to restrict it with surgical precision. The language of flowers functioned less as a genuine language, and more as an elaborate cipher. A desperate method for smuggling contraband emotions through an impenetrable blockade of manners. Picture a grand ball at the height of the London season. The ballroom blazes with the light of 1,000 candles reflected in crystal chandeliers. their flames dancing like captive stars. The air grows thick and oppressive, heavy with the mingled scents of lavender water, perspiration, and the cloying sweetness of hothouse flowers arranged in towering displays. The orchestra plays a waltz, that scandalous dance that represents the only socially acceptable moment when a man may hold a woman in his arms, though he must maintain proper distance and never hold her too intimately. In this charged atmosphere, our suitor approaches the debutante. He cannot simply present her with a flower. Such directness would be considered vulgar beyond redemption. The exchange must unfold with excruciating subtlety. Perhaps he accidentally drops a handkerchief with a sprig of myrtle, symbolizing love, tucked discreetly inside. Perhaps he offers her a dance card adorned with a pressed pansy, representing thoughts of you. Every gesture must appear casual while carrying profound significance. The debutante receives this coded offering with practiced composure. She cannot display surprise, for that would seem unseemly. She cannot show delight, for that would appear desperate. She must maintain the marble mask of aristocratic indifference while her heart pounds against her corset stays. She slips the flower into her glove or pins it to her bodice, but even this placement constitutes another layer of the complex code, a somatic language that transforms the female body into a living billboard for secret messages. If she pins the bloom over her heart, it signals acceptance or reciprocal love. Placement in her hair suggests caution or the need for discretion. A flower tucked into her décolletage indicates friendship or fond remembrance. Should she hold the blossom to her lips, she answers yes to whatever question it poses. If she plucks a petal and lets it fall, she declares no with devastating finality. The suitor watches this performance from across the crowded room, analyzing every inch of placement, every subtle gesture. Is the flower positioned closer to her shoulder than her heart? Has she moved it since he last looked? The ambiguity becomes exquisite torture. This system transformed every social interaction into a high-stakes puzzle that demanded constant vigilance. Guests could not simply enjoy a party. They had to decode the room continuously. A woman carrying striped carnations announced, "I cannot be with you," a message perhaps intended for one specific gentleman, but visible to anyone who understood the code. It provided a method for public rejection without utterance, a form of silent humiliation that maintained the appearance of perfect civility. The rituals extended far beyond romance into the treacherous realm of social warfare. Rivals might exchange friendly bouquets containing subtle insults wrapped in beautiful petals. A mixture of geraniums, symbolizing stupidity, and meadowsweet, representing uselessness, could be sent under the innocent guise of a colorful gift. The recipient, if she possessed botanical knowledge, would recognize the insult immediately, but she could not complain without admitting her understanding of the vulgar message. This elevated passive aggression to high art, allowing Victorians to inflict cruelty while maintaining facades of absolute propriety. The psychological prison of Victorian etiquette extended beyond mere social inconvenience. It fundamentally stunted emotional development. By filtering every feeling through botanical symbols, people lost the capacity to engage with unmediated reality. A gentleman could convince himself of love based solely on receiving a primrose, never having engaged in meaningful conversation with the woman who sent it. A lady could construct an entire fantasy relationship around the weekly arrival of forget-me-nots, building elaborate emotional castles on foundations of wilting flowers. Consider the tussie-mussy, those small, tightly arranged handheld bouquets carried in ornate silver or gold holders attached to the wrist by delicate chains. The chain serves as a perfect metaphor for the entire system. Women found themselves literally chained to their floral messages, unable to set them aside without committing social offense. They carried these heavy, increasingly fragrant symbols of obligation throughout endless evening entertainments, their hands cramping, the scents growing nauseating as hours passed, and the flowers began their inevitable decay. The etiquette surrounding floriography also bred a pervasive paranoia that poisoned social interactions. What if you consulted the wrong dictionary? What if the florist made a substitution? Historical records document misunderstandings that destroyed engagements and ruined lives. A gentleman might send red rosebuds, symbolizing pure and lovely, only to have the florist substitute fully bloomed red roses, suggesting mature beauty. A subtle difference that could be interpreted as inappropriately forward or presumptuous. A lady might intend to send yellow carnations, meaning disdain, but accidentally choose striped ones, indicating mere refusal, one implying active dislike, while the other suggested simple lack of interest. The constant fear of botanical miscommunication created a society of people terrified of directness. They became masters of evasion, experts in implication, specialists in the art of never saying exactly what they meant. They inhabited a world where nothing was concrete, where every gesture carried multiple potential interpretations, where a single misplaced flower could detonate years of careful social construction. This explains why Victorian literature overflows with swooning heroines and misunderstood heroes. The characters navigate emotional minefields, where one wrong step with a begonia could destroy their entire future. The economic dimensions of this floral obsession reveal another layer of control and manipulation. The most exotic flowers cost enormous sums, making the language of flowers literally a luxury that only the wealthy could afford to speak fluently. Orchids from distant colonies, rare roses forced to bloom out of season in expensive hothouses, exotic specimens that required teams of gardeners to maintain, these became the vocabulary of the elite, ensuring that even romantic expression reinforced class distinctions. As we prepare to examine the darkest aspects of this beautiful prison, consider the profound tragedy of a system that transformed love itself into performance art, when authentic emotion must be translated through purchased symbols, when human connection requires botanical intermediaries, when the heart's deepest truths can only be whispered through dying flowers. We must ask, what happens to the soul of a society that has forgotten how to speak its own? Feelings allowed? The answer lies in the shadows cast by all those glittering chandeliers, in the spaces between the petals where something far more sinister than romance was taking root. Chapter 4. The Dark Side of Wealth, Power, Misery, and the Price of Comfort. We have examined the illusion, explored the machinery, and witnessed the rituals. Now we must confront the cost, the psychological wreckage and spiritual devastation that lay beneath Victorian society's obsession with floral codes. The language of flowers was not merely a quaint historical curiosity, it was a symptom of a civilization suffering from profound emotional sickness, a manifestation of repressed trauma, sexual frustration, and the crushing weight of patriarchal control that squeezed the life from human hearts as efficiently as a corset compressed the female body. The most disturbing aspect of floriography emerged in its deployment as a weapon of rejection and emotional destruction. In a society where women could not easily refuse powerful men without risking their family's social standing, flowers became their only shield, but it proved heartbreakingly fragile. To return a bouquet constituted a declaration of war. To send dried white roses meant death to innocence, or I would rather die than marry you. These were violent sentiments wrapped in velvet petals, declarations of emotional warfare disguised as botanical gifts. There exists profound tragedy in the ephemeral nature of these desperate communications. A letter endures for decades, can be reread, treasured, preserved as evidence of feeling. A flower dies within days. It rots. It crumbles to dust. The message it carries vanishes with its physical form, leaving only memory and doubt. This temporary quality suited Victorian men of power perfectly. They could engage in illicit pursuits, send seditious messages through orchids and jasmine, knowing that evidence would decompose within a week. Floriography became the 19th century's equivalent of disappearing messages, designed for deniability. A gentleman could later claim ignorance. "I simply thought it was beautiful," he might say, gaslighting the woman who had correctly interpreted his advance. The flowers themselves reflected Victorian society's morbid obsessions. They favored heavy funereal blooms, lilies that reeked of death, tuberoses whose narcotic sweetness induced headaches and fainting spells. The scent of a Victorian conservatory often proved overwhelming, creating a stupefying atmosphere that literally poisoned the air. The frequent vapors and swooning episodes attributed to feminine delicacy were often symptoms of actual toxicity, women being slowly asphyxiated by environments filled with carbon monoxide from gas lamps and the respiratory depressing fragrances of thousands of forced blooms. Imagine the gothic horror of a woman trapped in a loveless marriage, surrounded by constant reminders of her imprisonment. Floral wallpaper covers the walls. Flower patterns adorn the carpets. Bouquets fill every vase, all chosen by a husband she despises or fears. She cannot escape these symbols of her captivity. The very thing meant to represent love becomes the bars of her emotional prison, a constant visual reminder that even beauty serves as an instrument of control. The Victorian fascination with poisonous plants adds another layer of darkness to this story. Gardens cultivated deadly specimens alongside roses, monkshood that could kill within minutes, belladonna that induced hallucinations and death, foxglove that stopped hearts with mathematical precision. In Floriography, monkshood meant chivalry is not dead, but its physical properties could end life in moments. Rhododendron symbolized danger, a meaning that proved literally accurate given its toxicity. The inclusion of these lethal blooms in romantic arrangements represented a subconscious flirtation with death, a way for repressed psyches to touch the void. "I send you this beautiful thing that could stop your heart" became both metaphor and potential reality. Consider the psychological toll of communicating solely through symbols rather than direct speech. It trained entire generations to search for hidden meanings in every interaction, to never accept anything at face value, to assume that surface appearances always concealed deeper, potentially threatening truths. This habit of mind extended far beyond Floriography into every aspect of Victorian existence. Clothing choices, home decorations, conversation topics, everything became potential code requiring deciphering. Victorian society transformed into a hall of mirrors where nothing appeared as it seemed, and everyone spent their lives trying to decode everyone else's secret messages. This created a peculiar form of emotional isolation that persisted even when communication succeeded. People remained separated by the constant need for translation. They could not simply feel and express. They had to encode and decode every sentiment. The immediacy of human connection disappeared in the laborious process of botanical interpretation. A woman receiving red roses might understand intellectually that they meant "I love you." But did she feel genuinely loved in the same way she might have if someone had looked directly into her eyes and spoken those words with authentic warmth? The question of authenticity haunted Victorian emotional life like a specter. When everything required expression through symbols and codes, how could anyone distinguish genuine feeling from skillful performance? A man well versed in Floriography could send all the appropriate flowers, craft all the correct messages, without experiencing any of the emotions those blooms supposedly represented. The system that enabled communication also facilitated elaborate deception, creating a world where distinguishing authentic emotion from masterful mimicry became nearly impossible. As the Victorian era drew toward its close, the language of flowers began its inevitable death. The First World War shattered illusions of order and propriety with brutal efficiency. The mechanized horror of trench warfare made the delicate codes of drawing-room romance seem absurd and obscene. Women entered factories and offices. Chaperones vanished. Corsets loosened, and people began speaking plainly again. The language of flowers retreated to dusty attics, becoming a curious relic of a bygone age that future generations would struggle to comprehend. But we must not regard this history with mere pity or academic detachment. The Victorians used flowers to mask their pain, to beautify their emotional cages, and to distance themselves from the raw, messy reality of being human. They created layers of aesthetic perfection to hide the rot underneath. They became the ultimate curators of their own existence, presenting filtered, edited versions of reality to a world that demanded performance over authenticity. Does any of this sound familiar? We live in an age of unprecedented communication technology. We can text, call, video chat with anyone, anywhere, instantly. We have no chaperones monitoring our conversations, no forbidden words, no social restrictions on emotional expression. Yet have we truly become more skilled at authentic communication? Or have we simply traded the code of flowers for the code of emojis, the silence of drawing rooms for the curated silence of social media feeds? Are we genuinely speaking to each other? Or are we still holding up pretty pictures, hoping someone, somewhere, will understand the secret messages hidden in our hearts? The Victorians turned their gardens into dictionaries and their bouquets into letters because they were too terrified to say "I love you," "I hate you," or "I am drowning in loneliness." They fought their battle against silence with petals and thorns, trying to bridge the gaps between souls with fragile, dying things. They created a language of beauty to express what their society had rendered unspeakable. As you encounter a bouquet of roses today, perhaps purchased from a supermarket or received on Valentine's Day, try to see beyond the commercial cliché. Feel the ghost of that Victorian suitor trembling as he handed over his coded message, terrified of its potential consequences. Sense the anxiety of the young woman decoding her romantic destiny one petal at a time, knowing that a single misinterpretation could alter the course of her entire life. The rich Victorian lifestyle was indeed a constant battle, not against cold or grime, but against the suffocating silence imposed by their own social system. They lived in beautiful houses, filled with beautiful objects, surrounded by beautiful flowers that carried ugly truths about the price of maintaining such perfect appearances. Was it wealth that truly defined the Victorians, or was it the quiet desperation that festered beneath their opulent facades? And in our own age of digital communication and curated online personas, are we really so different from those corseted figures arranging flowers in gaslit conservatories, hoping that someone, somewhere, might decode the messages we're too afraid to speak aloud? The language of flowers died because it was no longer necessary. When people could finally speak freely, they no longer needed botanical translators. But the human impulse that created Floriography, the desperate need to be understood, to connect, to communicate love and pain and hope, that impulse remains as powerful today as it was in the most restrictive Victorian drawing room. Perhaps the real question is not why the Victorians needed flowers to speak, but whether we have truly learned to speak without them. In a world where we can say almost anything instantly, do we feel more free to be authentic? Or have we simply become more careful about what we reveal? What would you choose if you had to compress your deepest feeling into a single bloom and trust someone else to carry it to the person who matters most? Would you have the courage to send it? Would you trust it to to survive the journey. And would you believe that the recipient would understand not just the flower's meaning, but the trembling hand that chose it? The Victorians built their floral language from desperation, but they built it with extraordinary faith. Faith that the right person would know the code. Faith that small, fragile things could carry the full weight of human hearts. Faith that love would find a way to speak, even when society demanded silence. As those long-vanished conservatories fade into history, their gas lamps extinguished and their exotic blooms return to dust, perhaps their greatest lesson is not about flowers or etiquette or social control. Perhaps it is about the indomitable human need to be known, to be understood, to reach across the void between souls and touch another consciousness with our own, no matter how many obstacles stand in the way, no matter how elaborate the codes we must create, no matter how fragile the vessels we must use to carry our most precious cargo. If this hidden language of love, power, and desperate human connection has moved you, take a moment to consider, which flower would speak for your heart today? What message would you dare to send if you knew it might change everything? Share your imagined bouquet, your modern coded message. Your thoughts on whether we have truly escaped the Victorian prison of silence or simply built new walls with different materials. And if you hunger to keep peeling back the beautiful lies that history tells about itself, to discover the human hearts beating behind the polished facades, to understand how our ancestors survived in worlds that seem impossible to us now, stay with us as we continue uncovering the hidden stories that reveal who we really are beneath the costumes we wear for each other.